Hello, I'm Michel and I'm the founder of Chinway. And I've got 5 tips for you on how to start looking at overseas markets and moving your business abroad. So I'll kick off with the most important one, which is probably the same for every bit of business, which is do your homework. When you're going abroad, obviously you're in a completely different environment, and the most important thing is to understand as much as possible before you leave, so that you can take full advantage of all the expense of getting there and use your time really effectively. So that's things like understanding how big the market is, how big the opportunity is, who the key players are, and not just from a client point of view, but also in terms of the key thought leaders in the market, the people who run networking events in that market, people that you can connect with relatively easily. Obviously, my second top tip is networks and contacts and networking. Absolutely key, obviously, to establishing a business abroad. We do a lot of work in the US, and fortunately the language isn't too much of a barrier, but I think this holds true from what I've heard in other markets as well, is to identify those sort of the key event organisers in a particular region. And they might be, depending on what your business is, it might be a show, it might be a conference, but it could just as likely be free networking events, meetups in bars these days, tweetups, Facebook groups, meetup.com, to identify, attend those, and be prepared when you're actually going to them to have a story to tell to the people that are turning up. Once you're in a market, the best way to take full advantage of being there is to make sure that your presence is known, that you're shelling out business cards, and that you're also following up all the contacts. This sounds incredibly basic, but it actually involves a lot of effort. And there's a story I heard in New York as well of they call it, for Brits that turn up, the 1,000 martini problem. Is that you end up drinking 1,000 martinis, preferably not on a single night, because that's not good. Before you get any meetings, you have to invest the time in understanding who the movers and shakers are, who the movers are but don't really shake, if you know what I mean. But the people who are actually going to be useful contacts to you, and then following up on those and getting meetings with them, which can take a bit of time. So the number 3 on my list of top 5 things is timing as well. So moving into an overseas market is expensive, and I don't just mean money, it's also in terms of people's time as well. So if you're a small business, and incredibly small, or even a medium-sized business, is going to take a lot of management time to go into that market, and you have to do a cost-benefit analysis of whether it's worth taking that time out of the business to look at an overseas market, or whether you should hold off until the business is more mature, or you hire somebody specifically to do that, because ultimately it will mean that there's other things that you could be doing locally that you won't have time and resource to do. So lots of people will use agents to go into an overseas market, but finding them and trusting them as well is obviously really, really important. So one of the things that we encourage people to do is to go abroad on relatively short research missions for about a week or a couple of weeks to try and get and understand the market, understand the opportunity, and working with agencies like UK Trade and Investment, and also lots of countries have inward investment departments of their government which will help you set up. Sometimes there's grants available, sometimes they'll make introductions, often there's events as well that you can tag along to. But I think that's really important, because you can spend £2,000 or £3,000 on one of those trips, but it could save you £100,000 from going over and not succeeding in actually opening in that country. And there may well be, when you arrive, challenges that you had no idea that were there waiting for you, and opportunity as well. So number 4 on my list is the money side of things. So I think it's very important to understand the costs of moving into a country and not going too early, too big. You can open an office, you can set up a company, and it's really important to have, in fact that's come out on lots of the work that we've done, is having the right advisors in place early on can be really important, because undoing and unpicking decisions that are made in haste can cost an awful lot of money. And typically when you're moving into a country outside the EU as well, you're talking about visas, you've got issues with setting up companies, you might have issues about whether you can own a company outright, and these things obviously are going to have a cost attached to them. So I think it's also a question of, I suppose, as is the trend these days with anything digital, is to bootstrap into an overseas venture before committing a huge amount of resource, so that you can pull back without putting too much money into that. Obviously if it's going well, brilliant, and you may well attract investment in the country you're in, but that also brings with it all sorts of complications like who you partner with and how you do joint ventures. And my final tip as well is to consider the geography of the country that you're going into. So this might sound weird, because you're hopping on a plane probably anyway to get to the country, but really consider the size of it. Thinking about particularly places like China or the US, it's not a case of you don't go into the US, you go into San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York, and really those markets are so large in their own right that you have to focus on that particular market before you can expand to the whole of the US, because you physically can't cover it. So another story I heard from one of the companies that moved into New York is that the real wake-up call for them was they started doing really well, they started having people approach them and ask them to go do full dog and pony shows to pitch their company, which was great, but they would expect them to do it very quickly, typically next day or with 2 or 3 days notice, and they could be anywhere. So it would be a case of their sales guys they were based in New York, and their sales guys would have to hop on a plane at 12 hours notice to Vegas to go and do a presentation, which I know sounds tough, but it might not be as glamorous as Vegas. It might be, I don't know, Utah. Anyway, that geography also has an impact on how you approach the country and how you plan it out. So you need to think strategically about who your big partners or clients are likely to be and where you position yourselves. And also, if you're focusing on the consumer market, who are the partners that you're likely to need in terms of hitting that consumer market? Is it going to be the web app startup community based in San Francisco, or is it going to be the media and marketing and distribution companies that are set up on the East Coast? So there's my top 5 tips, and I hope that's useful.